So I also would like to, I have a couple questions for John Schaefer that I would like, do we have that mic? Said, you could come up here, John. I don't have anything for you, but when you were president, why were you so passionate about creating this, this great Center for Creative Photography? And what did you want, I wrote it down because I want to make sure I got it right. And what do you want people to learn from what's here?
Okay. Universities are the nation's attic. It's where we store memories, literature, and it occurred to me that no universities were really collecting photography. Photography is the literature of our time. I mean, people no longer write diaries. They keep photo albums. We record our history in photography. We had changes in labor laws due to Lewis Hine, turn of the century. 8-year-old kids working on cotton machines. We had people like, God, I'm getting old. The Jacob Riis, the photographs of immigrants in New York City in the Bowery and the slums. We had war photographs, and I told you earlier on about the reason I think Vietnam came to an end, largely because of photographs. So we were recording our history in photographs, and this is something that ought to be looked at in universities, collected, and studied. The environmental movement, Ansel Adams, all due to photography, pictures of the great national parks, America's treasures. And it struck me as an opportunity. And so we invited Ansel.
It's not exactly your background. I mean, if I look at your resume, I think this is the last guy who's going to like spin up a great institution like this about photography. And,
no, my background is in science, chemistry. But, you know, I know a hell of a lot more about English literature than English professors know about chemistry. My parents were immigrants, and they came over late 1920s. I never got to know my grandparents except through photographs, and photographs became the medium of exchange in our family. So I began taking photographs early on, and photography is something I really needed when I was president of the university, something to keep me sane. And photography became my outlet. So I went to an art school and took a couple courses in the evening, and began
while you were the
working
president?
well, just before I became president.
Uh-huh.
But then I became really interested in photography as a practitioner after I became president. Again, due to Ansel Adams. I called Ansel because I got a note from the folks at Santa Fe Mission who wanted to republish the book that he and Nancy Newhall did on Mission Santa Fe del Bac. He says, John, I can't do that. I've just given all my publications rights to Little Brown, and there's not enough demand for something like that for them to republish it. Why don't you go out and do a book on the mission? I choked. I said, all right, I'll give it a try. And I went out there, and the one thing I was going to do is not do any of the photographs that Ansel did, because, you know, that pretty risky
like
comparison.
A little bit.
Yeah, and cheating. So I got to know the friars out there. They gave me the key to the mission, and I'd be able to go out there at night and have the mission to myself. The statues out there were where I learned how to take portraits. I could screw it up. They wouldn't complain. I'd come back the next night and get it right. So that's how I got involved in photography. And then simply asked Ansel, who was the world's premier photographer at the time. Everybody knew the name. Come on down to the university and have a one-man show. And so we had a one-man show at the Art Museum across the way. And I was young and stupid. I mean, 10 minutes into the show, I said, Ansel, how would you like to give your archives to the University of Arizona? And he was a little bit taken aback. He said, well, if you'd like to think about photography beyond just myself, why don't you come up and talk to me? So a few weeks later, I went up to Carmel, spent a week there, and the concept for the Center for Creative Photography evolved, and that's how it got started.
I bet you weren't smoking in his house. Thank you. If anybody has any questions, I'd be happy to. How are we doing on time, Beck? Are we all right? Okay. A couple questions. Oh, there we go. Microphone. Anybody want to ask anything? Like, ask Rebecca. She's like way better at answering stuff than I am. What's it like to be married to David Kennerly? Boy, that would be a nightmarish answer, I'm sure. Anybody? Oh, there we go.
How did you and Ansel meet?
Right, Ansel, when I first met him, I was in the White House. We had corresponded and we talked on the phone, and he came into Washington, D.C., and that's when, for the meeting with President Ford. But I had such a good set. The thing, like John pointed out, I think it didn't take long to get to know Ansel well. If he was such an approachable guy. I mean, you hear the mythology of Ansel Adams. Like I was never, I had the good fortune to be an instructor at the Ansel Adams workshop his last time he was there as a teacher. And just the way he, like with Susan Ford or anybody, he treated everybody the same. And so I got to know him then, and it developed into a very wonderful relationship. Any more? Oh, we got one right here.
We have microphones
We
here.
got
Hold
one
on.
right there. There we go. Thank you.
Okay. Well, my
That's
question
not bad.
for you is, how did Gerald Ford decide to pick you as a personal White House photographer? What was the reason, or how many did he have to choose from? How did you make his
Oh,
acquaintance?
that's a good question. Why did he pick me as his White House photographer? When I came back from Vietnam, and one of the reasons I was in Vietnam over 2 years covering the war, and but Watergate was heating up in the United States. Essentially, the story had turned more to the United States and the politics, and so I went back to the U.S. and Time magazine. It was right at I give these talks about some of the people. Spiro Agnew, you need subtitles for some of the people I've photographed, like young people don't know who they are. The Vice President of the United States, Agnew, was under fire, and it looks like he might resign. So Time had me out following him around, and then when he resigned, my first Time cover, or Gerald R. Ford's first Time cover, was the portrait I took of him in his office. And there were several people being considered for that job, and Ford was it. And so then Time assigned me to cover Vice President Ford full time, and I got to know him and the family very well. And the day he became president on August 9th, 1974, I got invited over to the Ford's house that night, and there were just a few friends and family there, and I suspected he was going to ask me to do the job. I really liked him. I think they liked me. I was doing a lot of good pictures. He respected my Vietnam background, and but I was very skeptical about doing the job because at that point there had only been 2 official White House photographers. LBJ's guy, Yoichi Okamoto, to this day is the best White House photographer ever, personal photographer. And Ollie Atkins was Nixon's guy, and he had no access to speak of. He could go in, take a couple pictures, and get out. And I didn't want to do that. I was like, I have a great job at Time magazine. I travel all over the world. And I had serious misgivings about the position. And so that night, I'm sitting in his living room with President Ford and me on the couch, and he's smoking his pipe. And he said, well, I'd like what would you think about the White House photo job? And I was 27 years old, and I thought, and this is a good lesson for people, I think. I looked him right in the eye and I said, I would be interested if I reported directly to you and I had total access to everything that was going on. And, these conversations sometimes are best kept really brief. And so he stopped smoking his pipe, and I thought, okay, I'm going to have to call my parents and say, the president offered me a job, and I told him to shove it, essentially. And he started laughing. He said, you don't want Air Force One on the weekends? And so, let's just say the rest is history. But ultimately, I had total access. And by the way, I had a top secret clearance that was not provisional. Right. Is that it?
Is that it? Thank you.
Thank you
so
all.
much.
Thank you.
Thank you
Great.
all for coming. You were great.
Oh, thank you. Very good. Okay.